Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming. Really nice to see such a good turnout. So, my name's Julie Atherton, and just so give you a little bit of a background on my experience and why I'm here today. I've been asked by the IDM to talk today. So I started my career client-side working with a global publisher, magazine and book publishing. So really at the heart of true kind of content, creating content and how you sell and distribute that content on a global basis. And I was there for about 12 years, culminating in running their film and music divisions. And then I left the client world and I went to join a startup agency, which was a direct marketing agency at the time. And as the Chief Strategy Officer, I was responsible not only for all our clients' strategy work, but also for the social selling of our business and taking that agency into a full-service digital agency. So I work with lots of different brands, both B2B and B2C. And after we sold that business for the second time, I set up on my own as a consultant. So I now work with lots of not-for-profit education brands. I sit on a few boards as a NED. And I work with B2B brands in helping them to use social media and social selling, as well as for marketing, using marketing and social in marketing. So, and alongside that, I tutor for the IDM in social, I chair the DMA Social Media Council, and I'm writing a book on social media, so I'm quite busy. But I hopefully know a bit about social in the context of how you run your business and how you're going to make social selling work in the context of all the other things you're doing within your organisation and how it fits within your strategy. So what I'm going to cover today, we've only got this evening a fairly short amount of time. So I'm going to touch on an introduction into what social selling is, which many of you may be very familiar with. And so this is kind of my view on what social selling is. We're going to talk a little bit about the buying journey and how that is affected by the digital landscape. And then I'm going to talk about the core social selling platforms, but at a very high level, just giving you some tips about things that you can do there before you are ever to consider spending any money on advertising within those channels. And then the dreaded marketing and sales kind of like friendship, love-hate thing. I might just touch a little bit on that as well as I'm going through. So first of all, what is social selling and what do we mean by it? And I think it's really important for us to be clear about the purpose of what we're trying to do. And I really like this definition by HubSpot. I think actually their current definition is slightly different, but I prefer this one. And I think it's really, I've highlighted a number of words in this definition because I think it really emphasizes what we're trying to do here. It's about when salespeople, so it's not about marketing, it's actually about the sales force and that selling process that you're going to, wanting to interact directly with your prospects. So you're wanting to add value to the conversation. You're wanting to answer the questions they've got. You need to really understand who that audience is to be able to do that in a thoughtful way. And it's about thinking about what the content is that you're going to deliver that's going to be different and compelling than your competitors have, so that you can help that prospect come to the decision to buy from you. So ultimately, it's about relationships, and that's what sales is all about. It's about building those mutually beneficial relationships that are going to result in a win for you and a win for your customer. And I actually nicked this relationship model from a outdoor adventure site. So it's not really, it may be some kind of really technical, it might be an academic thing as well, but I don't know if it is. But I really, really like it because I think it really sets out what the building blocks are in building a relationship that is a successful relationship in a commercial way. So first of all, that core foundation is trust. What is it that you're going to do to establish trust in the way that you behave, in the way that you act, in the way that you set the parameters of what their expectations should be of that relationship and how you live up to those expectations? The next building block is the communication. So, social is all about communicating. It's about dialogue. It's about people sort of listening to what people's needs are and responding to those in an appropriate way. And how do you communicate? And many times when you're trying to manage a sales pipeline, you haven't got time to communicate on the phone or face-to-face all the time, or the prospect that you're trying to engage with doesn't have time to engage in those moments. So you can use social to support that communication through alternative channels. How you problem solve, if you can help people solve their problems, you can build a much deeper relationship than if you have a very superficial kind of answer to what's going on. And the thing that's great about collaboration is because of the investment that happens. So if you've invested in that relationship and your prospect has invested in that relationship to create some level of collaboration, you are more likely to have a longer term relationship or something that will result in something meaningful. So ideally a sale, or perhaps a resale or a longer term partnership with those people. And then finally, it's about execution. We don't finish at the sale. How do we behave after that? How do we deliver what we promised in the setup in the beginning? Will actually feed back into the trust that there is between your brand, your business, and their organization. And if you go on their website, it tells you a load of other stuff about what it does for outdoor adventure, but that's my kind of take on their little pyramid, which I do really like. The other thing that I think is quite important for us to think about is the ways that social selling is used. And so some of the tools that are being used and some of the ways that sales forces are using social to really fine-tune the conversations they're going to have, that interlinking between the digital world and the real world is really, really important. And it may be that you use all of these things and they're in a different order of priority than they are in this chart. But I think each of these things are quite important to think about. If you aren't using those within your social selling process, then maybe ask yourself where, could I find more out about my audience? What would that tell me if I knew a little bit more about my competitors? If I'm looking at what my contact's doing on Twitter before I make that call, will I be more ready to be more prepared to answer the questions that are really challenging them at the moment? And I think it's very easy for us in our organisations to talk about ourselves and what we do really well and shout out about that. But we need to put it in the context of the customers and the prospects that we're talking to. When I was running the agency, we had a very big client in the automotive industry. And so, as an example, we changed our strategy in LinkedIn, where we're dealing with, as board directors, we very rarely went to the client meetings. The board directors of the automotive company didn't very often come to our meetings. So how do we keep that ongoing communication? How do we keep our sort of thought leadership front of mind all the time? We did that by changing our LinkedIn strategy to be publishing and commenting on things that were important to them in their industry in the context of what we delivered as an agency. So rather than shouting about our new office at Edinburgh and how many staff we had and what a fun party we'd been on and we had a few new hires we needed, we talked about Brexit and the impact that was going to have on the automotive industry and on creative thinking. We talked about the way that car ownership was changing. Instead of people owning cars, they're renting cars now. And what does that do to the second car market? And what does that then do to how you start to think about a different way of running your business model? So these are the kind of conversations that we legitimately can talk about as an organisation that get us into the front of mind with our clients, rather than telling them stuff that, quite frankly, a lot of times they're not really interested in. And you can find out what those conversations are, how important those conversations are, by doing some preparation, by looking into social channels and listening to what they're commenting on, what they're following, what their interests are, in order to guide you on what they might need, as well as obviously by speaking to them themselves and understanding their businesses. So that's just a little example from there. So I want to talk about the online buying journey and how it's different from the traditional kind of sales funnel. And I was just talking to David before about my hobby horse, which is the slide after this, which I'm also going to talk about. So this is kind of your normal sales funnel that everyone talks about. There's various variants of it, but we're generating some awareness and there's lots of people at the top. Then as we go down through the funnel, the volume gets less and we have interest generated turned to desire. And then obviously we want action. And we do want that action. That action is important in a digital environment as well. But I prefer the McKinsey loyalty loop, which has been around for a number of years now, in that it describes the way we decide and make decisions in a digital world. So yes, there's a consideration set, but we're one click away of moving people in and out of that consideration set. So we start with some. We might go down and have less. Then we might add in a few more to that consideration set because we see something else that looks interesting. And the whole thing kind of evolves and it doesn't get smaller and smaller. It can go big and small and add to it. And then eventually we get to the moment of purchase and we're cock-a-hoot because we've sold, we've made a sale and that's brilliant. Get our bonus, all of those. It's great for us, but this is the worst moment in the buying process for the person who has made the purchase. They are terrified often that they have made the wrong decision. And the longer that consideration and evaluation process is taken, the higher the ticket value of the sale that you have made, the less confident that person will feel that they've made the right decision. And so as a sales process, we have got to help people enjoy that moment, feel good about that moment, reassure them that they've made the right decision and let that experience be really great so that we can build that advocacy, we can build that bond between the two organisations and hopefully they come back in to buy from us again without going out again into that wider environment. So I think we often forget what a customer feels like at the moment of purchase because we're so pleased that we've reached our own goal. And we need to think about what those things might be that make that, that difficult, that moment difficult. So that's kind of my favourite, that's one of my little pet things that I'm slightly obsessed with. We're probably all going to think I've done this wrong. So I don't mind if it's wrong. But I've kind of take the loyalty loop and think about sales and marketing and the challenges there often are within businesses between the sales and the marketing teams. And in a B2B process, the sales process can often be very long. And ownership of different parts of the process can be held within the marketing team or within the sales team. And there's a tendency sometimes to kind of try and keep that to yourself if it's your part of the process. But actually, it's really important that it feels continuous. And as I showed you in the loop, people will move in and out of these phases. So you need to be aware of what that journey is like for your organisation and liaise with marketing quite closely to make sure that you're having that dialogue and the content you're creating, the way that you're talking and the expectations that you've set up are working in exactly the same way, whoever's owning whichever part of that process. So this is just an example that happened with one of my clients of where their process ownership was, but yours might be slightly different. So this is kind of, just something that I would encourage you to think about and just have an open dialogue in your organisation about who's doing which bit of it, because if you think they're doing it and they think you're doing it, then you've kind of got a little bit of a problem. So I love this example. Because I get a lot of people going, I work on a B2B brand. We sell like software for legal software and it's so dull and nobody's interested in it. They're really, people who work on consumer brands, sound like they've got a really fantastic time and they're all selling this great stuff and everyone's got an emotional connection with them. The reality is that people who are buying B2B brands are much more emotionally connected to those brands that they're buying. And if you stop for a moment and think about it, you know why. If I go out for lunch and I'd choose to go to Burger King or McDonald's and it's awful and I wish I'd gone to the other, really isn't that big a deal. If I've just taken on a new software package for my business and I've picked the wrong one, my job is on the line. So I am really emotionally invested as a customer in those things that we as salespeople often think are a bit dull and we don't know what to put in the content for them. So I think, try and think about what the importance of the decision is that you're asking somebody to make. Are there ways that you can support through stakeholders, influencers, more information to make that feel better and less scary than it might be? We've all probably been in that situation where you think you've closed the sale and then it just goes on and on and on with this kind of like checking and can I look at this and can I look at that? And that's all signs of that insecurity about, I just can't quite bring myself to sign on the bottom line. So I think the other thing that we need to think about as well is in this journey is about where we've got the credibility and the authority to really speak uniquely about what we offer as an organisation. We need to really gather insight on who our customers are, our prospects are, and what they're interested in. So the automotive example I gave before, what is it that those C-suite, those directors really want to talk about in social media and actually around the board table? And how are we going to be able to demonstrate that we've got a business strength in this area that differs from our competitors? And sometimes your product or service may not be different from your competitor in many ways. Pretty much you put them in a little table and tick a few boxes about what you offer and they offer, they're pretty much the same. But how you deliver that, the people that you have or what you add to that or how you make it bespoke to your customers might be different. So you need to identify where that business strength is, and you can do that with social listening, you can do that with research and talking to people, and need to be quite sure that that's what you're doing. And this is, I quite like Venns, but this is quite a nice way to take what you currently have in your content delivery perhaps and just map it and see, am I really doing anything that's in this business strength area? Am I looking to see what the new opportunities are that my customers might want to hear about? Or am I really just doing this kind of navel gazing in where me and my competitors and I are kind of talking to each other? So I had somebody who came on one of my I run a social media course for the IDM, and somebody came on that because she was responsible for their LinkedIn, for the organisation's LinkedIn, and she was like held to be like this god of LinkedIn. Everyone thought she was brilliant because they had loads of engagement on LinkedIn, a really high number of people following their business, and everyone thought that she was doing a fantastic job. She did a little bit of analysis of what was going on. She found that 90% of her followers were their competitors, and 100% of the people actually engaging with the content were her competitors. And not a single customer had ever liked or shared or commented on anything they'd ever done. So obviously she didn't go straight into the C-suite and go, oh, actually you all think I'm great at my job, but I'm rubbish. She kind of decided to go and find out how to make that better. But it's really easy to just look on the surface of what you're doing and not challenge yourself to see what's underneath. Okay, so I'm not obviously going to go into masses of detail about how to sell on all of these channels, but I am going to talk about them a little bit and talk a little bit about customer behaviour within this channel. So my other hobby horse, I suppose, in social is about consumer behaviour. So I'm very, very interested in how people naturally behave. So social channels are set up because they are the answer to the way that we normally interact in real life, face-to-face, in a digital world. So we want to kind of have these engagements, we want to chat, we want to share, we want to show people our photos from our holidays or whatever it might be in the real world. And then all these different social platforms that exist to be able to do that in a digital world. And in marketing and in sales, we are trying to identify people's natural behaviour in these spaces. What does somebody normally do? What would they do if they were chatting to their friends in this space? What would they do if they were just, doing their normal thing? And what we want to create is a way of facilitating that behaviour in relation to what we want them to do towards our brand or business. What we don't want to do is try and make them do something that they don't normally do. So, could you send an email about, reply to an email to this, or send an email, when actually what they want to do is chat about it in WhatsApp. Because we're forcing people to behave in a way that isn't natural to themselves. And therefore it's a much bigger ask then to get them to do what we want. And actually, if we're trying to build trust, if we're trying to build a conversation, if we're trying to do all those things from that lovely outdoor adventure pyramid, we can do that by reinforcing the behaviours that people naturally do. So these are just some figures of, the volumes that are on these social networking sites. And Facebook is huge, like over 2 billion monthly users on Facebook. But Facebook is not what it was 18 months ago, and certainly not what it was 3 years ago. It's a very, very different environment. And your audiences on Facebook will be behaving in different ways. When they're on Facebook, they're not really at work. So it's a different kind of engagement that you need to have in that space. If you decide to use it, then you would do LinkedIn or Twitter. But B, how people behave is very, very different now. So if I give you an example from my own life, I have a great aunt, Auntie Lil. She's in her 90s and she lives in sheltered housing. And she's on Facebook. And she's real old school Facebook. She posts absolutely everything about everything that's happening to her and her mates, to all her family and friends, and pretty much anybody else she can dredge up who might want to be a pal on Facebook. My son is 18. He's on Facebook. He never posts. He doesn't share any comments. He doesn't speak to anybody on it. The only reason he's on Facebook is because him and his friends have private messaging groups on Messenger, where they organise all their lives, they chat, they do group video sessions, and they use it as a platform to have private conversations in. So those two extreme age groups are working on using Facebook in a very different way. But you need to be aware not only what channels your audiences are on, but how they're behaving on those channels. Because if they never post or share or go onto those channels to actually communicate, and they just exist in that space, then you're going to have a very difficult time creating engagement in that space. YouTube obviously is very large. Instagram's come up and is owned by Facebook and is becoming a very interesting space. I'm not really going to talk about Instagram that much today. I'm going to talk about Twitter, which is a really strong and interesting channel for social selling, and continues to sort of persist despite quite a lot of talk about that it's never going to survive. And I think it is a very interesting environment. And I'm also going to talk about LinkedIn, which is sort of fairly low down on the volume, but obviously the importance in what many of you will be using it for in a business context is really key. So I'm just going to show you as well what's happening in this change in social, this move into private messaging over social broadcast messaging within social. So WhatsApp and Messenger are both owned by Facebook, as is Instagram. And the top 4 instant messaging sites now have more activity on them than the top 4 social media sites. This is where people are engaging in conversations, and this is how people are behaving. So if I give you an example of, I'm really lucky, I'm going skiing for Christmas. So 16 of my family are all going skiing for Christmas. We're going in a chalet in France. And the age range of this group is from 75, because my mum and dad still ski, down to 9, which is the youngest child. My dad booked this very expensive holiday and did all the liaising with the sales people in various different organisations while we decided what country we were going to, whether we were doing hotel and all that malarkey. We as a family made all the decisions and put all our two penny worth and had all the conversations in a WhatsApp group set up specifically to make that decision. Any travel sales professional who had suggested setting up a WhatsApp group could have got that sale, probably could have increased the value of that sale quite significantly, could have reduced the time it took to do that sale than my dad having to ring round with the feedback from, 15 other people in a WhatsApp group. Think about the behaviours that your customers have. How do they make decisions? One person may book a holiday, but a holiday is only as good as your unhappiest child. And you really need to take into consideration the influencers. And whether that's a holiday or a tech sale in a business, there will be influencers, there will be other people that will be communicating through different channels, different ways that are easy for them to have those conversations. And you need to know what those are, really. So I'm going to talk about the first three here, not really WhatsApp, but I just wanted to stress the importance, I suppose, of these private messaging channels and the place that they have. And I'm probably in a place that's quite different than, you might have. We're all told that we need an email database with opted-in contacts that we can go back to over many years and share lots of different content with them. And, there is a place for that in your sales process. But there is also a place for a finite time, something that only lasts for a very small period of time to do that job. And the WhatsApp example I gave you of the holiday sale, we don't need to be chatting to that guy for the next 3 years in our WhatsApp group. We can disband it afterwards because it's done the job it needed, which has made everyone feel like they had a choice in where we were going. They were listened to and they could share what their thoughts were. We could get a holiday that met everybody's needs. And that then could be disbanded, or, if he's worth his salt, maybe he might ask us if we want to stay in it until we go, just in case there's some extra things we want to add, like lessons or restaurant bookings or whatever it might be. This is the kind of in the moment kind of service, which means we don't have to be constantly sending out 10 contacts a week. We do it in very short bursts when it's appropriate to that customer. And so the priority channels, I would say, are LinkedIn and Twitter. And I'll talk a little bit about how you could use Facebook perhaps as well as I'm going through. But really, LinkedIn is about building the relationships, cementing those relationships, being seen to have that thought leadership. Twitter is about listening and understanding and working out what makes people tick, recognizing that not everybody comments, not everybody retweets and posts, but they might be following. What are they looking at? What do they check in on? How do they keep up on the news in their industry? Probably on Twitter. And therefore you can do a similar thing there as well. And then Facebook is more about giving the opportunity for your customers to talk about you, perhaps, to have a vehicle for those reviews, to have a place where if somebody wanted to see what it was like to be your customer, they might go there. And it may be less or more appropriate depending on what kind of business you're in, whether you need to be there. They aren't all the channels, obviously, there are loads of others. This is a survey that's done fairly regularly asking how effective different social channels are for B2B, and LinkedIn always seems to come up top, and I can understand why. Twitter really punches above its weight in terms of volume because of the kind of audience that we've got there. So LinkedIn. So it's quite interesting to see that LinkedIn, in terms of the quantity of traffic that's being driven in B2B marketing from social channels to your websites, to your blogs, LinkedIn really takes the biscuit for having the most of that, driving most of that. And if you've got meaningful content, and that content could be, to your point, doesn't have to be all your own original content that you've done. You might comment on something else that's being out there in the zeitgeist that's really interesting, and then drive somebody to your website, something that you've maybe written long form content on or have the answer to. From that. You don't have to always have it driven from your own. And LinkedIn really is very important in driving conversion as well to leads. So some quite interesting stats there about how powerful LinkedIn can be. I'm not really going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but obviously, there's quite a lot of different things that you can identify, prospects and customers on LinkedIn, and segment them by age and gender, by the size of company they've got, what kind of sector they're in, job function, what level of seniority. So there's very high level of C-suite, senior decision makers who are engaged on LinkedIn, that use LinkedIn for their own networking, their own information, and their own, input into sort of ideas and things that they might be driving. So it's a good place to be as a business if you're trying to deal with senior people. Now, I'm not going to go into loads of detail on the LinkedIn tools and paid for things that you can do on LinkedIn. So, probably you're all familiar with things that you can do in terms of advertising, sponsoring email, sponsoring content, all the different things that they have, the Sales Navigator tool that you can use as well. And there may well be a place for that in your strategy and in your social selling. And you may be using it very, very effectively. What I'm more concerned about, just highlighting, I suppose, tonight, is that there are lots of places, things that you can do within your social platforms with your sales team, and they may not be very confident in social. So you might need to really support that with them. But there are lots of things that you can do to make LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook work better for you before you start to spend any money on these expensive alternatives. So first of all, it's about optimizing your profile for search. So what is it that's in your profile that really talks about what your business is, So what do you deliver as a business? Not necessarily what your job title is. Because your job title isn't a meaningful delivery of what you're going to achieve for somebody. So you want to be coming up in the things that people are searching for, that they're interested in, that your business drives. So you might put your job title in there, but you'd also put in information about what your expertise is in your profile. You need to be asking people for recommendations and endorsements on the core skills, experience and expertise that you have as an individual and that your business has. And this is on your company page and personal page. You need to build those connections. So make sure that you're really looking at how you add the connections that you've already got, because you don't know where those people are going to go next, where they're going to be. When you've been around as long as me, lots of people I was connected with when they were quite junior now have really important jobs and spend lots of money. So, people start off very further down the organization, but by the time you end up maybe working with them, they might be a lot more senior and a lot more able to impact what you're doing. Use your LinkedIn in your email signature, and make sure if you ever meet with anyone face to face, you follow that up not only by an email, or maybe even instead of an email with a comment in LinkedIn, because people actually do look at that LinkedIn communication and you see those notifications and you see those things in your feed quite regularly. So think about how you behave and maybe try following up in LinkedIn rather than following up by email, just with a short note, and then doing the detailed information stuff in the email or in the other follow-up documentations that you might send. Make sure you've got a plan of how you're using LinkedIn, what's the level of activity that you expect, what's the type of content you want to be in there. Have you got a calendar of what you want to do? How are you measuring the performance of what you're doing? Make sure you know your audience. So who are my customers really? Who's the decision maker? Who's the influencers? How are they consuming that content? What are they interested in seeing? What are the issues that their industry faces? So when they're sat around their board table and they say, oh, XXX company, so I've got this really interesting paper on what's happening in our industry, everyone's impressed and interested and you're being spoken about, as opposed to, oh, XXX industry have just had a Christmas party and got a whole new suite of office furniture. Or, do you know what I mean? Some of the stuff you see is so weird that you're just thinking, who cares about these things? So, you may, sometimes somebody will tell me that their audience love it and they're always engaging with it, but, I live to be impressed. So, and then the other thing I think is about maybe you should be thinking about joining some groups or setting up a group about a subject area that you can really add that authority on, that you've got that point of difference, you've got that strength in your business, and it's about an area that your customers own. And it might be that you need to pick off different, you can't manage multiple groups, so maybe 2 or 3 groups are where you want to be. To your point earlier, proactively engage with discussions that are important, where you can add value, start discussions, alert your customers to those conversations. If I see something that's really relevant to one of my clients in LinkedIn, I will send that to my client in LinkedIn and say, oh, I just saw this. It looks really great about what we were just talking about the other day. Let me know if you want any more information on it. So you're just using that channel. It's very easy for me to share that information. I haven't taken it into an email, haven't pretended I came up with it myself, but I'm adding value to the relationship with the client. Create some original content. Maybe you want to become an influencer in your area of business. You want to be somebody that people come to for that authority. Or you want to follow those people who are the core influencers who set the trends of that sector, and therefore you're ahead of the curve in commenting and being seen to lead that, so that you really have a positioning of thought leadership in what you offer as an organisation and your point of view on it. And I think this is sometimes quite hard, that people think, I haven't really got time for doing this, so how am I going to find the time? So this is where it goes back to having a plan and an expectation of what you're going to do, and thinking about what your LinkedIn behaviours are going to be in your organisation. How do you want that to work? So I've got a nice little example here. Does anyone speak Swedish? No, I don't either. But E.ON moved into wanted to create awareness, brand awareness about the fact that it now had a really renewables energy strategy, and was a significant player in the renewables space. And one of the ways that they did that was they asked every single person who worked for E.ON in Sweden to put the word sunseeker, which is that word that's highlighted there in Swedish, into their job title. So that actually, sun farmer into their job title. So what happened then was all the contacts of all those individuals then, oh gosh, what's sun farmer? Why have you got sun farmer you've got a new, it goes out as a job notification that you've got a new role. Everyone's interested in that. You can start then having a conversation about what that means for E.ON. And as long as everybody in the organisation knows what they're going to say and how they're going to respond to those questions, you actually have a very meaningful conversation around a business change that you've made as an organisation, and at every level through all of the different contacts that you have within your business. So it's very clever. Obviously, you can't do that every week, but it's a very interesting and thoughtful way of using a social platform to really help your selling.
Can I ask? That assume that you can just tell your employees what they should put on their LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, I still see it as a personal term, and that's something my company can tell me what I have to do.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point, and it will depend on what your organisation is doing. But certainly often in B2B, in sales, you will use your LinkedIn profile for selling on behalf of your organisation, for building relationships with potential customers in your organisation. So we, as part of our social selling strategy in our agency, the board and all of the senior management team signed up to a strategy that meant that we would use our LinkedIn profiles to support the overall selling strategy of the organisation. And so we used our thing in that way. We all benefited from that because we're all building our own personal profiles at the same time. What you need to have as an organisation is some level of protection on that. If you've got a big sales team, that your top sales guys then don't just leave with all these contacts and you don't own them as a business. So how do you link that into your business page? How do you make sure that's not just one person's got that contact?
Which can individuals have two accounts? See, I don't see how that's ever going to work, because I would never allow my employer to tell me what to do with it.
That's fine then. So you're not going to probably use it in that way. But many sales forces will use their LinkedIn profile for their own individual, because they're using their contacts. It's like their little black book. It's their phone book. You know, if you're a salesperson, you've got a phone book. In the old days, you've got an email, you know, and you've got your LinkedIn profile. So, you need to have multiple people that are dealing with an individual. For instance, you can't just have one person who's got the relationship in the business. And you also can set up your company page to be supported, as you know, to try and get people to also follow your company page as well as following those individuals as well. So you can think strategically about it. And I would encourage you. That wasn't somebody fainting, was it? No. Oh, right. So, you know, you need to think about, if you're going to ask people to use their LinkedIn profile, that is their profile. It will go with them when they go to a new job, but it can be a very useful toolkit, exactly like their black book of phone numbers would have gone to them with them in a new job as well. Yeah. Yeah, the company. Yeah. So if you're using Sales Navigator, you can do that. But if you're not using Sales Navigator, then you're doing it through your own, you know, and smaller businesses won't be paying for Sales Navigator necessarily. So just need to think about it. Twitter demographics are quite different. They're very young. They're also very male. And as I say, there'll be lots of people on Twitter who don't actually actively do anything, but they do follow quite a lot of people and they use it as a very interesting news feed. I'm not a very active user of Twitter. It's actually my favourite channel. I'm a complete news junkie, so I spend loads of time on Twitter. The engagement levels on Twitter are very, very low. So, you know, there's a lot of following and not a lot of commenting, sharing, liking, whatever. And just in terms of engagement levels on social channels, if you see like where the decimal point is there on Twitter, you can come one stage further, you know, better. Move that decimal point one place better if you're on Facebook, and then move it again another decimal point better if you're on Instagram. So Twitter is really the low engagement end of the spectrum. But I wouldn't be worried about that. There are ads and various things that Twitter has for tools. But before you do that, I would suggest that you think about how you really get underneath what's going on in Twitter in your sector. And this you can have, you know, multiple profiles. So you can have somebody running a Twitter profile for work as well as having their own private profiles. You don't have to, you can follow people without them, you know, accepting you to follow. You can follow whoever you want. So you can really use it for listening for industry trends. I would think about how you might use private messaging. I've got my business hasn't been going a huge amount of time, and I've not invested in getting a huge Twitter following. I've actually generated business through private messaging in Twitter when people have just, you know, contacted me through Twitter originally, and then it's led on to a meeting. Think about pinning your most important tweet or the thing that you want people to see at the top of your profile. Think about maybe hosting or engaging in Twitter chats, so getting something that's going on in real time. You can engage with your customers or follow your competitors. We touched on hashtags earlier. Think about what's relevant to you, and maybe think about segmenting your customers or your prospects into different lists so that you can look at their behavior in those different ways. And then think about what how you're going to run Twitter for your organization. If the salesperson is running their LinkedIn themselves, but with support from marketing and support from the wider sales strategy, you might run Twitter as a central resource, from the business. And isn't down to that individual to do it. But then what are the rules of engagement and what's going to happen? And will you be expecting sales teams to look at your Twitter feed as well as looking at it? And I touched on earlier, Twitter's great for researching what people are doing. I quite like this, it's made me laugh. 77,000 followers and 2 tweets. So, think about what you're going to do if you have a Twitter profile. Maybe do something. That's just a little laugh, really. So, we've got a few minutes before the end. I'll just touch a little bit on Facebook. So, these are the demographics for Facebook in the UK. So, pretty much a lot of people are on Facebook. Doesn't mean they actually do anything on Facebook. So think about how you know what's happening with your audiences on Facebook, and think about how you even use Facebook differently from those other channels. So your kind of mindset when you're on Facebook is kind of play, not work. It's a different kind of expectation on the type of content that you might expect to see. And you are with social listening, you can tell when people are engaging with those channels. So is it in the morning on the commute to work? Is it on a desktop or a mobile? Is it, in the evening? Is it at the weekend? So that'll give you kind of an idea about what types of content might be suitable for Facebook. Engagement on Facebook has kind of been plummeting. Hence, lots of changes to the algorithm and various other things in an attempt to kind of improve that engagement level. And as you'll see, the decimal points moved a point in the right direction compared to Twitter. They have loads of ads and tools that you can use. And, obviously, because Facebook own Instagram, you can post directly into Instagram from the same from Ad Manager in the same way into both platforms from Ad Manager. Not probably the right thing to do because they're quite different formats, but and different ways of being used. But it's possible to do that if you want to. So I think just before you pay for doing advertising, first of all, think about whether Facebook is something that you want to include in the mix. How is it going to support your business? Do you need to do it? Is it actually too time consuming? Just because your competitors are there, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be there. It can be, though, a very powerful way to engage with customers and get the support of those customers and get visibility for reviews of your products and services. And so, a bit like that chart I showed at the beginning where we've got that post-sale moment, how we're embedding the liking, the enjoyment and the support of that can be quite useful there. And also for people when they're researching to kind of go in and see what's happening. If we're talking about influencers, it kind of widens that sphere of influence. CEO might be a dad as well as, they're normal people too. They have a downtime. And so sometimes Facebook can give you an opportunity to engage with people and get your core messages across at a time where your competitors might not be doing so and in a very different way than they're doing. And I'm going to show you a short video in a minute of somebody who's used that in that way. And then the other thing is, you might decide to create a private group and use Facebook for some kind of decision making. So my final shout out really before I finish is just think about this journey and think about the marketing and sales relationship and think about what each of those social platforms might be able to do for you in building those relationships but maintaining them not just up to the point of the sale but beyond that sale to make sure that the people who you sell to feel really good about the decision that they've made. And that's me done. Thank you very much.